What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. It is official, folks. We made it. NFL Draft Weekend is finally upon us. Rejoice. I am so incredibly excited. I'm jumping on here to talk through my final Steelers 7-round mock draft that I dropped this morning on SteelersNow.com with you guys. I want to talk through some of my predictions, just thoughts on what I think could transpire over the next 72 hours or so, add some details just about some of these prospects, the direction, some strategy stuff from a Steelers perspective. Before I do that, my top 100 big board is live for SteelersNow.com. Over 8,000 words of scouting notes on the top prospects in this year's class. That link is in the description as well. Please be sure to check that out if you're interested. Hopefully, it'll be a helpful resource to all you draft sickos out there. Also, don't forget, I will be streaming right here on this channel before the draft kicks off tonight. We're going to get started around 6:15 Eastern time. Go for a couple hours. I hope that you guys will join me. Bring your questions. Let's kick it. Talk some ball. And as for this video, you guys know the deal, man. Please make sure that you like, subscribe, drop me a comment. I would love to see your all's mock drafts as well. I'll try to respond to as many of those. And you know, if you have questions on specific prospects, I'll try to look at that as well. But you know, let's get into it, man. You know, for the Steelers, from their perspective, I think that they're typically a pretty easy team to mock for. If you're somebody that covers the team religiously or even follows them like a diehard fan, their interest is usually pretty public. I do think that this year is more difficult in terms of figuring out where they're going to go in the first round. More difficult than in years past, where you've been able to at least narrow it down to a particular position. Last year, I kind of always felt like it was going to be offensive line, but this year I'm a little bit more muddied on that. And I think it's, you know, coupled by the fact that this draft class doesn't have a lot of top end talent. A lot of the commonly mocked players in the first round have medical concerns. So I think that tonight's going to be extremely unpredictable. And that's what I think is going to make for great television, suspense, all of that, all of those different things. From the Steelers' perspective, I think my preference, if I had to tell you guys what I would prefer for them to do today, right now, as I sit here, I would prefer for them to trade down, just because you look at it, they have some of the least draft capital available to them in terms of any team in the NFL. Only 6 draft picks. Their second round pick is with Seattle and from the DK Metcalf trade. And I just think trading down, you'll be able to get a very similar caliber of player just based on like the grades on my particular big board. But it is easy for me to say that right now, right here, without knowing who's going to be on the board available to them. If they stick at 21, and I do anticipate that they will entertain trading it down. I'll explain where I kind of think there's a cutoff in that, though. If they do stick and pick in the first round at pick 21, I think it's going to come down to a couple of prospects. I think it's going to be down to Colorado quarterback Shedeur Sanders, Oregon defensive end Derek Harmon, and Michigan nose tackle Kenneth Grant. Those would be the 3 best guesses that I would have for you guys as I sit here today. So let's talk about just the thought process with these guys. Now, Harmon, he's been kind of tagged a little bit over the past 72 hours or so. Potential medical stuff coming out with his shoulder. Maybe some teams are kind of worried about that. We saw a similar thing happen with Troy Fautanu. I think he was a lot higher touted of a prospect, at least in my opinion, than Harmon was. But, you know, we don't really know. It seemed like Harmon has really gained a lot of steam throughout the process. He is the number 22 player on my big board. I think he's a really solid prospect. And somebody that definitely looks like a Steeler throughout the cycle. I've been saying that he kind of just feels like a Steeler to me. Very typical Steelers selection. Now, Kenneth Grant is interesting because I think the Steelers had really they didn't have him in for a top 30 visit like they had Harmon in, but they were planning on going to the Michigan Pro Day. But then the Aaron Rodgers thing happened, and Mike Tomlin and Omar Khan didn't end up getting out there. They did have a formal meeting with him at the combine. Everything that I've heard seems like they are still very much interested in Grant. Grant's a guy who I think has a lot of untapped potential, maybe a little bit of a misunderstood prospect, in my opinion. You guys can go watch the top defensive tackle rankings that Nick Martin and I did, and you can find extensive scouting notes on both those players. Now, when it gets down to it, I do believe that Shedeur Sanders has a good chance of being there at 21. It only takes one team to take him ahead of that. Somebody could trade up and get ahead of Pittsburgh, because I think that there is a lot of smoke around that potential pairing. And some teams, like if they really want him, I think that they will feel pretty inclined to get in front of the Steelers. I just struggle to see if everything is equal and they have a first round grade on Shedeur, they have a first round grade on Derek Harmon, for example. I struggle to envision a scenario where they would actually take a defensive tackle over a quarterback, just given the state of the roster, but also just the state of like the importance of the position. I think getting a pass rusher, getting a good run defender like Harmon is important and it makes the team better. But the team doesn't have a quarterback right now. And I'm not saying that they're going to feel the need to reach on somebody that they don't have conviction on. But I do think that the Steelers are really intrigued by Sanders. And I think the late pre-draft visit that they had for him into the facility, they weren't at his pro day, didn't show a ton of like interest until late in the process. But I really just believe that their minds were kind of made up that he wasn't going to be available to them. And it was almost like one of those things where they weren't even considering that as a realistic possibility. Now it just seems like, everybody's kind of caught on to a lot of the teams at the top of the draft aren't necessarily as high on him as maybe the media previously assumed that they would be, which could work in the Steelers' favor. Now with Shedeur, I've talked about Shedeur a lot. I've wrote about him extensively. I've watched 6 or 7 games of his tape from this past season. There's a lot to like in terms of the toughness, the accuracy. I do think he's a highly intelligent quarterback. He takes care of the football. My interest is definitely peaked at what he can be in terms of what he can be at the next level. He is the number 34 player, I believe, on my big board. He finished with a 2nd-round grade. That's really where I've had him since back in November when I did the early video on the quarterback class. So I do like the player. I don't necessarily love him. I know it's like that's kind of a difficult conversation to have because it seems like you either have to love the player or you hate him, and that's just not how I view most things in this process. And I think with Shedeur, the question really surrounds like what's the upside because the tools are what they are. I think that he could definitely mitigate some of those things by playing with more anticipation, getting him in a better ecosystem, behind hopefully what is going to be a better offensive line. The thing with Shedeur is like he's going to have to be a different player at the next level than the one he was in college, and I think that's going to be challenging for him. But there's a lot to like just from a competitiveness standpoint, accuracy standpoint, like I mentioned, and I that's just kind of the way that I think things are going to play out. I think they'll take him at 21 if he's there. I find it hard to believe that they would trade back or pass on him. There's always a wild card. I mean, they could take one of these other quarterbacks too. Like we don't really know necessarily the order that they have them in. They spend a lot of time with a lot of these guys, so they're going to take a quarterback in the first 3 or 4 rounds. I would bet a significant amount of money on it, even if it's not in the first. I just think if Sanders is there at 21, I think they'll feel pretty inclined to take him. So that's who I went with in the first round. I wanted to talk through that process, my thought process there at length, because I know I had a lot of questions on Twitter about it and DMs and things like that. So if they take a quarterback in round 1, what do they do next? They don't have another pick until pick 83 in the 3rd round. I have them picking Joshua Farmer from Florida State, defensive tackle. You look at Farmer, there are definitely some things that, I think the Steelers will be particularly drawn to. He's got near 35-inch arms, unbelievable wingspan for the position. There are times where like he can really fire off the ball, establish first contact with his hands inside to just knock guys backwards 2-3 yards. And there are some really wow plays on film with him. There's definitely some upside here. He likes to use this kind of push-pull move to win these close combat engagements. He has enough hops like off the line of scrimmage to, shoot gaps, and he's just a very strong individual up top. I think one of the things that left me a little bit disappointed with Farmer's film overall, and the reason why I had him at 98 on my big board with that early 4th-round grade, was just that I kind of thought that with his build and his overall skill set that he should have been more dominant, more productive than he was at Florida State last year. Not necessarily a great defense that he played on at all, but there were just a lot of lulls in his production, plays that would go by that he wasn't really making an impact. He has a bad habit of playing really tall and really narrow, sacrificing his pad level. It affects how he takes on double teams. He doesn't really have a well-diversified pass rush skill set right now. He's more so just trying to win off like athletic traits and try to get on guys' edges and bully them with his upper body strength. And that stuff can be developed at the next level. I do like the fit, getting him in the room with Cam Hayward. You look at the Steelers roster right now, they have a significant need. Cam Hayward, how much longer is he going to be able to do this? Keanu Benton, like what's the next step in his development? Is it at nose tackle? Is it at defensive end? Is he, a true impact player? Or is he just more of like a solid starter type? Those conversations are things that are being talked about in the building. I think with Farmer, he's probably not a guy that can come in right away and start from day one, but the Steelers typically don't do that anyway with their 3rd, 4th-round pick types. But he is a guy that I think can come in and fill a role in a rotation. You can kind of bring him along slowly, and then hopefully you get some of those other things, cranked out. Defensive coaches get their hands on him, can kind of tap into some of that potential. And then as his rookie contract kind of moves along, or rookie year hopefully moves along, you can kind of put more on his plate and give him some more some more of a workload. But that does kind of fill what I would consider like the second biggest need right now. They don't, they signed a couple guys in free agency. They've got some decent role players, but they're more like guys that you want playing 15 snaps or so rather than a true starter. And while I acknowledge that Farmer's not there, and he probably wouldn't be my first choice here if they were to take a defensive tackle, I'm a really big fan of CJ West from Indiana. He's top 75 on my big board. They haven't really shown a lot of public interest in him. One guy they have shown interest in is Jamari Caldwell from Oregon. I'm fascinated by what he's going to be at the next level. He's a guy that's played nose tackle next to Derek Harmon, but he's also played three tech back from his days in Houston. I think he moves extremely well. He's shockingly nimble for his size. So he would be somebody I hope that they would consider here. I would be a fan of that pick. I have him ranked a little bit ahead of where I have Farmer. So those are kind of some names that I would consider. I think the running back conversation is like, this is, one to be had as well. I think there's a logjam of a lot of really good backs in this kind of fringe day 2, early day 3 category. And that's why with my next pick in the 4th round, I ended up taking a back. And full disclosure, I think that the 4th and 5th round picks that I made in this mock draft were honestly like my favorite ones. I ended up going with Bashal Tutin from Virginia Tech. Jalen Warren's back in the mix. He just signed his restricted free agent tender, but it's a 1-year deal. Kenneth Gainwell is kind of like a nice, depth piece as well. But they're going to need somebody else that can take, the kind of load off of him and at least take some carries. And, when I think about what the Steelers could potentially be looking to add in the backfield this cycle, and it really comes down to 2 things. I think they're looking for explosive play capabilities, somebody that can create splash in the run game. That's not necessarily something that, Harris brought to the table for all of the good things that he did for them out of the backfield. And then even Warren last year dealing with the injuries, we didn't see a lot of explosive plays generated from his standpoint either. And then they need a zone running back, somebody that's capable running outside zone, somebody that's capable reading out these like mid-zone concepts and finding the cutback lanes. To me, that's Bashal Tutin. He has outstanding speed, like true blurry speed for like true home run hitting speed, I would say. He's got loose hips for quick cuts in the open field. He can make guys miss. He absorbs contact fairly well for his diminutive build. I have him at running back 9 in this class, which is probably a little bit ahead of where the consensus does, mainly just because I see the vision for what he could be at the next level. And the contact balance, the ability to absorb contact was something that kind of sold me on it. I don't necessarily think that he's ever going to be a guy that you want taking a ton of carries in between the tackles or like a 20 touch per game guy, but that's not necessarily what the Steelers need right now. And it's also just not really where the NFL is either. Like, we don't have a lot of running backs that are coming in and getting 18 to 20 carries in the NFL. Like, those are really the special types that you're probably going to be taking higher than this point in the draft anyway. So I think that Tutin is an excellent scheme fit. I am particularly worried about the fumbles. He has put the ball on the ground a ton. I think it's 9 times in the past 2 seasons. Like I said, the durability will be a question mark because he's just over 200 pounds. I'm not particularly worried about that because it wasn't a huge concern in college. I am intrigued by what he could be in the passing game. You could probably get him involved in screens. I think in the Senior Bowl, one of the things that I liked is we saw him work more as a receiver in one-on-one situations. He looked pretty fluid doing that. Didn't drop a pass last year. Pass protection, I think he took a step forward this past season. I'm interested to look at more of his film to get a firmer grasp really on that. But yeah, I think that he can come in right away. I mean, Tutin's a guy that it wouldn't surprise me if he ripped off multiple 50-yard touchdowns in his rookie season. I think he's that explosive. He moves differently than everybody else on the field. And I think they would consider some other guys, and they brought in a plethora of guys for pre-draft visits at this position. It's very clear where they're going to look at. Caleb Johnson is probably my favorite one that they brought in, but I think he'll be off the board by this point. Absolutely. Probably won't even be there in the 3rd round when they get up to pick. Big fan of his game. DJ Giddens from Kansas State would be somebody. He's a guy that he's a weird one because he's a little bit of a back stuck between 2 styles. Like, he's built like he might be more powerful than he is, but he doesn't necessarily play as explosive as maybe his testing would indicate either. But he does have really good ability to make guys miss at the second level. And that is one thing that I really liked about his change of direction and just feel for space at that level was pretty impressive. There's other guys that they've looked at. Jaden Blue is way more of a project and projection than a guy like Tootin, but he's extremely young. I was kind of surprised that he came out in this cycle, a guy that could catch the football. You can split him out as a receiver, things like that. But I just haven't seen enough on film to put him, in this type of category, honestly. So my next pick, this is probably my favorite one that I made in the mock, is Justin Wally from Minnesota. If you guys follow me on Twitter, I've been talking about Wally a good bit, really since his pre-draft visit was announced. I went to his tape. He was one of the final prospects that I watched this cycle. And I was honestly like blown away because I just had never heard anybody really talk about him. And, it was a pleasant surprise for me when I watched him. He's number 90 on my board. He's one of the lowest late third round grades that I gave, but I went and looked and seen where like the consensus kind of had him. Dane Brugler has him as a 6th round pick. I believe some other places on like consensus boards and things like that have him in the 200. So I think it's realistic that he could be available at this point, even though I value him a lot higher than this. Wally checks a ton of boxes for what I personally look for at this position. He's got versatility. He hasn't necessarily played in the slot, but he's been in an NFL style defense. They run a lot of role based coverages. He can play man. He can play zone. He can get up and press. I think he can do all of those things at an NFL level. And I think that he actually does project pretty well into the slot if that's an opportunity that you want to give him. He's got really good functional athleticism. He's extremely tough. He played last season on a partially torn MCL, which I thought was just pretty incredible because I went back and watched that's the tape that I watched was 2024. I want to go, if they pick him, I'm excited to go back and watch 2023 just to see what he looked like as a mover. But, he's just a really tough kid. He's got over 40 starts in college. So he's somebody that pretty much immediately played and they could just never replace him. He was constantly on the field. And like when I watched his tape, I struggled to come up with things that would prevent him from not, at least getting on the field at the next level. I think he could be a little bit grabby at the top of routes. The missed tackle rate is maybe a little bit higher than you want. But for a guy that was playing injured last year, I saw a guy that was willing to trigger downhill, try to blow up screens, try to make tackles in the run game. Those things are just really intriguing to me at this position. And, I personally would love for them to get a slot cornerback. And I think that Wally could factor into that equation, but I'm excited about what he could be on the outside. Maybe getting one of these guys that can fill multiple different roles, give you some alignment versatility would be a huge bonus. And I came away thinking from his evaluation that this dude is going to play. I'm not saying that he's ever going to be a cornerback 1, but we're talking about day 3 of this type of draft. I mean, if you get a guy in the 4th or 5th round that you're comfortable with playing on your defense as like one of your top 3 corners, that's a home run. You know what I'm saying? And that's just kind of the way I felt with Wally. So I went back and watched, the USC game in particular, and he was running routes for people. I was just incredibly impressed by some of the things that he can do. He's definitely got some swag to him, a lot of confidence, which that's what you need at the position. So not an overwhelming athlete, but a good one, I think, with good functional athleticism. The next pick I went with, just to kind of wrap up this mock draft, I wanted to pick somebody in this mock that or a couple guys preferably, that they hadn't had a ton of interest in, like public, just because we know the link between pre-draft visits and like their pro day attendance and things like that to guys that they pick. But there always are like 1 or 2 that come out of left field, and predicting those is impossible. But I tried to think about things that would make sense in my head. I ended up taking Brew McCoy, wide receiver from Tennessee. I just feel like he looks like an Arthur Smith style receiver off measurables alone. He's over 6'2", almost 6'3", I believe. He's 210 pounds. He's a physical receiver with a lot of experience playing against press coverage. He played the X in their offense. Really tough customer, I felt like, to bring down after the catch. Like, you'll see him try to stiff arm guys. He does like lower his shoulder into contact. He's capable of winning vertically. He's got adequate build-up speed. And I think he's got a pretty vast catch radius as well. Wasn't always great in those contested catch situations, but you do kind of see the vision with him a little bit. He's an older receiver with a lengthy injury history. That's one of the reasons why I think he hasn't been talked about at all throughout this process. Wasn't super productive, kind of disappointing numbers in that offense. I do think there was some production that was left on the field due to inaccurate throws down the field that would have, boosted his numbers a little bit. But even like through the pre-draft process, I think he's been dealing with a hamstring. So I don't know. Like wide receivers coach Zach Azani was at his pro day, potentially for Dante Thornton. Thornton was the guy I thought about putting here, but this seems too low for him. I think he's going to go early day 3 just because he can really, really fly. McCoy isn't quite that fast, but what actually drew me to him was I actually think he's a pretty good blocker. And when I think about one kind of archetype of wide receiver that the Steelers are missing right now, they really need somebody that can block. Metcalf is a decent blocker when he wants to. I think that he can definitely mix it up a little bit, but as the X in this offense, that's not really going to be his primary responsibility. If you're going to have somebody that's going to be playing a little bit closer to the formation, or if you want to play in these like tighter splits, Pickens isn't really necessarily a blocker either, assuming like they end up keeping him and Metcalf together, at least for this season. The other slot receivers that they've got, Calvin Austin, really small, not going to be an impact blocker. Roman Wilson showed a lot of grit and tenacity in the blocking game at Michigan, but it's like, there were even times on his film where he got kind of jolted backwards by a bit bigger defenders, and it's kind of going to be difficult to ask him to do some of the things they're going to need him to do in this offense as well. So I think a big-bodied receiver that could come in and help block and compete for a roster spot at this stage of the draft. If you guys haven't been paying attention, I'm pretty low on the wide receiver class overall, to be honest with you. So that's just my opinion. I'm not a huge fan or as big of a fan as I think a lot of people are of this group. And then last player that I ended up picking was RJ Mickens, safety from Clemson. I just felt like when I wanted to put a player in this spot, I wanted to put somebody with either NFL bloodlines or a connection to the Steelers in some way, just because it always feels like there's like somebody, right? Like somebody related to a former Steeler or a coach, is somebody. So I thought about Carson Bruner here from Washington, a linebacker, but they've got a lot of backers already on the roster, but he's somebody with a lot of special teams experience, and he tested extremely well. I actually am a little bit intrigued by his coverage upside as well, but I ended up going with RJ Mickens. He is the son of Ray Mickens. His dad played 10 years in the league. He passed down those defensive ball skills to his son. Pretty solid athlete overall. I think he's got good instincts, impressive ball skills, 7 interceptions. He had another interception called back as well in the games that I watched. Been a known commodity, I feel like, around college football for quite some time now. He's got over 2,100 snaps. The role I kind of envision him being is like, could he be a dime backer? Could he be somebody that comes in and kind of matches up with tight ends? He's got pretty solid length. He's got a decent build to him. Maybe he's a box safety. Doesn't have a ton of range on the back end. Like I said, he gets by with more like instincts than like short area burst. But yeah, I kind of do see the fit. The Steelers were well represented at the Clemson Pro Day, but to be honest, like they're always there. I'm not trying to insinuate that they were there to see him specifically, but I do think it makes sense. I think the Steelers have kind of flirted with the idea of adding to the safety position. They showed a ton of interest in Nick Emanwari. That would not be my preferred route of choice for them in this draft, especially if it cost them a first-round pick. But, I'm curious about, where they choose to kind of address that position and if they are able to. A lot of the comments and feedback that I've received on the mock, some of it's, positive, some negative. I understand like every mock draft's like that, right? Like some people love it, some people hate it. I would be curious on your all's thoughts. Do you like the mock? Would this be something that you would be happy with? What are some positives or negatives feedback that you would have for this? Again, I want to keep things like pretty realistic as I can, and not pick all players that necessarily I'm in love with. And like, to be very clear, this is a predictive mock draft based on what I think that they would do, not necessarily what I would do. Now, there are a couple picks in there. Obviously, you heard my enthusiasm about Justin Wally as a player, about the fit with Bashal Tutin. Those things are my heart is in it a little bit there. But if they did come away with this haul out of draft weekend, I would be cautiously optimistic about it. Of course, a lot of that depends on how the quarterback develops, right? If they take a quarterback in round 1, and we could talk about all of those things over the next several days, it's an incredible risk, but there's also an incredible reward that lies on the other side of it too. So it's going to be a fantastic and very entertaining weekend, and one that I'm extremely excited about. I'm excited to, kick it with you guys, talk ball. Again, just as a reminder on your way out, if you could, like, subscribe, drop me a comment. Let me see those mock drafts. Make sure, to set your clocks to come join me. Come hang out for a little bit, 6:15 to 8 o'clock-ish Eastern time. I'll be streaming. We'll be talking about big board stuff, different draft possibilities. I'll be taking all of your all's questions for about a little under 2 hours. And then after the pick is made tonight, if you can't join, that's cool. Everybody's got stuff going on. After the Steelers make their pick tonight at some point after the first round, I'll be jumping on here to do a kind of a recap video on who they selected, my thoughts on how the board played out, the prospect that they came away with, all that different stuff. And I'm really excited about that as well. And I'm also planning on streaming Friday before second and third round kickoff as well. So I hope that you are going to kick it with me. I know a lot of you are just as excited as I am for draft season. So as always, I really appreciate your all's continued support. Peace and love.